The temple in Jerusalem, a place revered as the dwelling of God's presence among his people. The grandeur of its design, ornate carvings, golden embellishments, and the aroma of burning incense filling the air was a visual and sensory testament to the holiness of God. Yet, in the midst of this already sacred space, Isaiah, a young man of noble heritage, witnessed something that surpassed human comprehension. Without warning, the veil between the mortal and the divine tore open, revealing a vision of God seated upon his throne. The sheer magnitude of the scene overwhelmed the senses. The throne, described as high and exalted, symbolized God's supreme authority over all creation. His robes flowed, filling the temple, representing his boundless glory. Light emanated from the divine presence, so intense and pure that it exposed the frailty of everything around it. Hovering around the throne were the seraphim, otherworldly beings, whose appearance captured the awe-inspiring essence of heaven. Each seraph bore 6 wings, 2 covering their faces in reverence, 2 shielding their feet in humility, and 2 in motion, ready to carry out the will of God. Their chant, a hymn of eternal adoration, reverberated through the temple. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. This threefold declaration of holiness was not a mere repetition. It emphasized the unmatched purity and otherness of God. As the seraphim sang, the temple itself quaked and smoke filled the air, a physical manifestation of God's presence. For Isaiah, the splendor was almost unbearable. Before such a display of divine glory, Isaiah's reaction was one of profound humility and despair. He cried out, "Woe to me! I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. And my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty." In the presence of perfect holiness, Isaiah became acutely aware of his imperfections. His unclean lips symbolized not just personal failings, but the collective sinfulness of his people. This confession was a pivotal moment. Acknowledging his inadequacy and sin was the first step toward his spiritual renewal. In response to Isaiah's cry, one of the seraphim approached him with a live coal taken from the altar. This coal, a symbol of purification, was pressed against Isaiah's lips. The seraph proclaimed, "See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away and your sin atoned for." The burning coal did not harm Isaiah physically. Instead, it signified a spiritual cleansing. The fire represented God's holiness, consuming impurity and refining Isaiah for his divine mission. This act illustrated an essential theological truth. Sanctification is a work of God's grace, not human effort. Isaiah's experience mirrors other transformative encounters in the Bible. Moses, trembling before the burning bush, received his calling to lead the Israelites. Ezekiel, overwhelmed by visions of heavenly creatures, was commissioned to prophesy to a rebellious people. Paul, blinded on the road to Damascus, was transformed from persecutor to apostle. Each of these figures experienced a profound personal reckoning and purification before being sent out to fulfill their divine purpose. As the vision unfolded, Isaiah heard the voice of the Lord asking, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" Without hesitation, Isaiah responded, "Here am I, send me." This willingness marked a shift in Isaiah's character. From a man paralyzed by unworthiness, he became a servant ready to carry out God's will. His response set the tone for his prophetic ministry, one that would be both challenging and pivotal for the people of Israel. Isaiah's purification and commissioning were not just personal experiences, they had far-reaching implications. He was tasked with delivering messages of both judgment and hope. His prophecies would confront the people's sins, warn of impending consequences, and ultimately point to a future redemption through the coming Messiah. For readers today, Isaiah's vision offers a powerful reminder of the transformative power of encountering God. It challenges us to recognize our own shortcomings, not as a cause for despair, but as a prelude to spiritual renewal. Just as Isaiah's unclean lips were purified, so too can our imperfections be addressed by the grace of God. Before we continue with the video and the rest of the story about the prophet Isaiah, I want to ask for your help. I'm trying to reach 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so I'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe and help me out. Okay, let's continue. Isaiah's story is a beacon of hope and purpose. It teaches that no matter how unworthy we may feel, the divine can refine and equip us for extraordinary tasks. His encounter with the living God prepared him to be a voice of truth in a turbulent world, reminding us that moments of personal transformation often lead to lives of profound impact. As Isaiah stepped out of the temple that day, he was no longer just a man of noble lineage. He was a prophet, a servant of the Most High, carrying a message that would echo through the annals of history. Isaiah's divine transformation in the temple was the crucible from which his prophetic calling emerged, an awe-inspiring moment that would define not just the trajectory of his life, but the spiritual destiny of Israel. The scene had shifted. The purifying coal had seared his lips, cleansing him of guilt and sin. And now, in the stillness following the celestial symphony, the voice of God resounded through the temple. "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" This was not just a question. It was a summons to step into a divine purpose. For Isaiah, the weight of the question settled deeply in his newly sanctified heart. Without hesitation, he responded with words that would echo through the ages. "Here am I. Send me." This declaration marked Isaiah's complete surrender to God's will, a profound expression of gratitude for the grace he had received and a resolute acceptance of the mission ahead. With those words, Isaiah became not merely a man cleansed by divine fire, but a prophet appointed to speak on behalf of the Almighty. However, the path laid before him would be far from easy. Isaiah's calling came with a sobering revelation of the challenges he would face. God disclosed the nature of his mission, to deliver a message to a people who had hardened their hearts and dulled their ears to the truth. Be ever hearing, but never understanding. Be ever seeing, but never perceiving. These enigmatic words were not just a description of the people's spiritual state, but a prophetic insight into the resistance Isaiah would encounter. Israel, steeped in moral corruption and social injustice, had strayed far from the covenant. Isaiah was to confront this rebellion head-on, knowing that his message would often fall on deaf ears and hardened hearts. This grim reality must have weighed heavily on the young prophet. He was not being sent to win the favor of kings or the applause of the masses, but to faithfully proclaim the word of God, regardless of its reception. Isaiah's success would not be measured by immediate results, but by his obedience and faithfulness to the task. Armed with the vision of divine majesty and the authority of his calling, Isaiah embarked on his mission with unshakable resolve. His proclamations were sharp, cutting through the pretensions of religious and societal hypocrisy like a blade. Woe to the sinful nation, a people laden with iniquity. Isaiah's words thundered through the streets of Jerusalem, exposing the rot that had infiltrated the nation. He decried corrupt leaders who oppressed the poor, judges who accepted bribes, and priests who performed hollow rituals devoid of true devotion. To Isaiah, outward displays of religiosity were meaningless without inner transformation. His exhortations were direct and urgent. Learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. These were not suggestions, but an impassioned call to repentance and reform, a summons to return to the foundational principles of the covenant with God. While Isaiah's message often centered on judgment, it was never without hope. His vision extended beyond the immediate consequences of Israel's rebellion to a future where divine justice and mercy would triumph. He proclaimed, "Come now, let us settle the matter, says the Lord. Though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be as white as snow." This invitation to forgiveness echoed Isaiah's own experience in the temple. Just as the divine fire had purified him, God extended the same opportunity for transformation to his people. Isaiah painted a vision of restoration, a time when Jerusalem would once again be called the city of righteousness, the faithful city. These glimpses of redemption served as a beacon of hope amid the darkness of impending judgment. They reminded the people that repentance and renewal were always possible, even in the face of divine wrath. Isaiah's mission placed him in direct confrontation with the power structures of his time. He stood before kings, priests, and false prophets, challenging their actions and policies when they strayed from God's will. When King Ahaz sought political alliances instead of trusting in God's protection, Isaiah boldly confronted him, offering a divine sign to strengthen the monarch's wavering faith. Isaiah's integrity in the face of opposition was unyielding. While false prophets assured the people of peace and prosperity, Isaiah delivered the hard truth of impending judgment. His courage to speak truth to power, even at great personal risk, solidified his reputation as a true voice of God. As Isaiah's ministry progressed, his message expanded beyond the immediate circumstances of Israel. He began to articulate a broader vision of God's plan for humanity, one that transcended national boundaries. His prophecies spoke of a coming Messiah, a king from the line of David who would establish an eternal kingdom of justice and peace. Isaiah described this future with vivid imagery. The wolf will live with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. These prophecies offered hope to a weary people, pointing to a time when God would intervene decisively in human history. They revealed a divine plan that extended far beyond the immediate crises, encompassing not only Israel but all nations. Isaiah's prophetic journey was one of unwavering faith and steadfast obedience. He spoke with boldness, often at great personal cost, confronting the sins of his people and their leaders, while holding out the promise of redemption and restoration. His words, both of judgment and hope, continue to resonate through history, offering timeless truths about the nature of God's holiness, justice, and mercy. Isaiah's life and ministry remind us that true transformation begins with an encounter with the divine. From his vision in the temple to his fearless proclamations, Isaiah exemplified what it means to be a vessel for God's purposes. His story challenges us to embrace our own inadequacies, trusting that God's grace can purify and empower us for the tasks he sets before us. And so, with purified lips and a heart ablaze with divine purpose, Isaiah stepped into his role as one of the greatest prophets in history, a voice that would call a nation to repentance and inspire generations to hope in the promises of God. Isaiah's prophetic calling transcended the realm of spoken words. His very life became a canvas for God's messages, painted with bold, symbolic acts that captured the attention of a nation often deaf to the voice of reason and truth. These acts, while unconventional and sometimes deeply humiliating, served to underscore the urgency and reality of the divine warnings he carried. One of the most striking examples of Isaiah's prophetic embodiment came when he walked naked and barefoot for 3 years. This act, commanded by God, symbolized the impending judgment and humiliation of Egypt and Cush, nations in whom Israel had misplaced their trust for protection. Stripped of dignity, Isaiah's public display became a visceral illustration of the vulnerability and disgrace that awaited those who relied on worldly powers rather than divine provision. This extraordinary act demonstrated Isaiah's willingness to submit fully to God's will, even when it meant enduring personal discomfort and public scorn. It was not a moment of detached obedience, but an intimate alignment with God's purposes, where his very body became a message to the people. On another occasion, Isaiah turned his family into a living prophecy. By giving his children names imbued with divine significance, such as Maher-shalal-Hashbaz, quick to the plunder, swift to the spoil, he transformed his household into a daily reminder of the messages he proclaimed. These names carried the weight of God's warnings, making his children symbols of both judgment and hope. Isaiah's actions ensured that even the most mundane aspects of his life pointed back to the divine narrative, leaving no room for ambiguity about his commitment. Throughout his ministry, Isaiah faced moments of profound discouragement. The continued rebellion of the people, their refusal to heed his warnings, and the persistence of injustice and idolatry weighed heavily on him. How could a nation so steeped in sin ever turn back to God? Yet, in these moments of doubt, Isaiah found strength in the memory of his temple vision. The vivid encounter with God's holiness and majesty served as an anchor, a steadfast reminder of the divine purpose that underpinned his mission. This perseverance in the face of apparent futility is one of the most remarkable aspects of Isaiah's ministry. Even when his words seemed to fall on deaf ears, he remained confident in the power of God's word. As he declared, "So is my word that goes out from my mouth. It will not return to me empty, but will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose for which I sent it." Isaiah's faith in the efficacy of God's message sustained him, allowing him to continue proclaiming truth with unwavering resolve, even in the face of rejection. Isaiah's prophetic scope was not confined to the borders of Israel. He spoke of Israel's unique role in God's plan, but his vision extended far beyond national concerns. He envisioned a time when the God of Israel would be universally recognized and worshipped. In one of his most stirring declarations, he proclaimed, "Many peoples will come and say, 'Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, so that we may walk in his paths.'" This vision of a global pilgrimage to Jerusalem was revolutionary. In a time when gods were seen as territorial and tribal, Isaiah announced a God whose authority and invitation extended to all nations. This universalism expanded Israel's understanding of its mission, positioning it as a light to the world and a conduit for the redemption of humanity. Isaiah's role as a prophet was not limited to confronting sin and announcing judgment. He also served as an intercessor, pleading with God on behalf of his people. His writings reveal a heart deeply moved by Israel's plight, a man who wept for their suffering and longed for their restoration. In poetic prayers, Isaiah balanced his denunciations of sin with fervent appeals for mercy. He demonstrated that a true prophet does not stand aloof from the struggles of the people, but enters into their pain, seeking their redemption. His intercessory role modeled the delicate balance between divine justice and compassion, reflecting the very nature of God. Isaiah's unwavering commitment to his calling came at great personal cost. Tradition holds that during the reign of King Manasseh, Isaiah faced martyrdom, reportedly being sawed in half for his steadfast faithfulness to God's word. Whether or not this account is historically accurate, it underscores the dangers and sacrifices inherent in the prophetic role. Isaiah's willingness to endure rejection, ridicule, and possibly even death speaks to the depth of his conviction. He understood that the prophetic calling was not a path to honor or ease, but a life of service and sacrifice. His courage and dedication continue to inspire, reminding us that true faithfulness often requires perseverance through hardship. Isaiah's ministry did not end with his lifetime. His words, meticulously recorded and preserved, have resonated across centuries, shaping both Jewish and Christian thought. His vision of the suffering servant, one who would bear the sins of many, became central to the Christian understanding of Jesus Christ. Early Christians saw in Isaiah's prophecies a clear foreshadowing of Christ's life, death, and redemptive mission. Isaiah's writings also inspired hope for a future kingdom of peace and justice, where swords would be beaten into plowshares and nations would live in harmony. These visions continue to fuel the imagination and aspirations of faith communities worldwide, offering a blueprint for a redeemed and reconciled world. Isaiah's life and ministry were a profound testimony to the power of a life fully surrendered to God. His actions, words, and prayers were not merely reactions to the crises of his time, but contributions to a divine narrative that spanned eternity. He stood at the intersection of the temporal and the eternal, delivering messages of judgment tempered with mercy, of present accountability interwoven with future hope. Isaiah's story challenges us to embrace our own callings with the same courage and faithfulness, trusting that even when the path is difficult, our obedience to God can leave a legacy that echoes through the ages. From his symbolic acts to his intercessory prayers, Isaiah reminds us that a life aligned with God's purposes can become a powerful instrument for transformation, both in its time and for generations to come. Isaiah's enduring legacy finds one of its most profound expressions in the prophecy of Emmanuel, a revelation delivered amidst a storm of political intrigue and spiritual wavering. This pivotal moment not only addressed the immediate crisis facing Judah, but also transcended its time, becoming a cornerstone of prophetic hope that echoed through the centuries. Isaiah's confrontation with King Ahaz, rooted in the political and spiritual turmoil of his era, stands as a testament to the interplay between divine sovereignty and human frailty. The setting was ancient Judah, a nation trembling under the shadow of imminent invasion. The northern kingdom of Israel, in alliance with Syria, was plotting to overthrow King Ahaz and replace him with a puppet ruler. Ahaz, a young and inexperienced king from the house of David, faced an unenviable choice: trust in divine protection or forge an alliance with the powerful and ruthless Assyrian Empire. Fear and uncertainty gripped the royal court as the fate of Jerusalem hung in the balance. It was in this precarious moment that Isaiah, God's chosen messenger, entered the scene. The prophet met Ahaz at a seemingly unremarkable location, the end of the aqueduct of the upper pool on the road to the washer's field. This mundane backdrop became the stage for a divine confrontation that would ripple through history. Isaiah's message to Ahaz was clear and urgent. Be careful, keep calm, and don't be afraid. Do not lose heart because of these two smoldering stubs of firewood. The prophet assured the king that the conspiracies of Israel and Syria would not succeed. The threat, though real, was fleeting. Yet Isaiah's words were more than political reassurance. They were a divine call to trust. The message challenged Ahaz to place his confidence in God rather than in precarious alliances with foreign powers. To bolster the king's wavering faith, Isaiah extended an extraordinary offer from God. Ask the Lord your God for a sign, whether in the deepest depths or in the highest heights. This was no ordinary proposition. God was willing to provide tangible evidence of his commitment, accommodating human weakness to instill confidence. Yet Ahaz, cloaking his disbelief in false piety, refused. I will not ask. I will not put the Lord to the test. Far from being an act of humility, Ahaz's refusal betrayed his lack of faith. Beneath the veneer of reverence lay a heart unwilling to trust in God's deliverance. Isaiah's response to Ahaz's rejection was sharp and resonant. Hear now, you house of David. Is it not enough to try the patience of humans? Will you try the patience of my God also? With these words, the prophet broadened his rebuke from Ahaz to the entire Davidic dynasty, emphasizing their responsibility as stewards of the covenant. Then, in one of the most iconic declarations in biblical history, Isaiah proclaimed, "The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel." This prophecy, while addressing the immediate crisis, carried layers of meaning that reached far beyond Ahaz's reign. In its immediate context, the child symbolized God's presence with his people, a sign that the alliance of Israel and Syria would fail, and Judah would be spared. Before this child could discern right from wrong, the lands of the two kings Ahaz feared would be desolate. Yet the prophecy also pointed to a distant fulfillment, one that would redefine the nature of divine intervention in human history. The mention of a virgin conceiving was more than a miraculous biological claim. It was a symbol of God's supernatural power breaking into the human story. The name Emmanuel, meaning God with us, encapsulated the essence of divine faithfulness and presence. Even in the face of human rebellion, God's commitment to his covenant people remained unshaken. Despite the reassurance and grandeur of the prophecy, Ahaz's actions revealed a heart unwilling to embrace divine guidance. Instead of relying on God, he sought security through a political alliance with Assyria, a decision that would have devastating consequences. This act of pragmatism, though it provided temporary relief, led to spiritual compromise and the erosion of Judah's independence. Ahaz's choice serves as a cautionary tale for leaders and individuals alike, illustrating the dangers of placing trust in human strategies over divine wisdom. His rejection of God's offer highlighted a recurring challenge: the difficulty of faith in the face of tangible fears and uncertainties. Though Ahaz failed to embrace the message, the prophecy of Emmanuel endured, transcending its immediate context to inspire hope for generations. As Judah faced future trials, exile, oppression, and uncertainty, the promise of God's presence became a cornerstone of faith. The image of a child born as a sign of divine deliverance pointed to a deeper reality: that God's intervention in human history was not confined to grandiose displays of power, but could be manifest in intimate, unexpected ways. Over time, this prophecy wove itself into the fabric of messianic expectation. It became a lens through which the people of Judah understood their covenant relationship with God and their hope for ultimate redemption. For Christians, the prophecy found its ultimate fulfillment in the birth of Jesus Christ. The Gospels, particularly Matthew, explicitly connect the promise of Emmanuel to the incarnation of Christ, interpreting the virgin birth as a realization of Isaiah's ancient words. The prophecy of Emmanuel exemplifies the layered nature of biblical prophecy. In its immediate application, it provided reassurance to Ahaz and his contemporaries that God was present and actively working to deliver his people. Yet its ultimate fulfillment pointed to a transformative future where God's presence would be realized in the most personal way, through the incarnation. This duality, speaking to both present crises and eternal truths, underscores the depth of Isaiah's prophetic vision. His words operated on multiple planes, addressing immediate needs, while offering glimpses of God's unfolding plan for humanity. The Emmanuel prophecy remains one of Isaiah's most enduring contributions, a testament to the power of prophetic words to transcend time and culture. It illustrates how God's faithfulness persists even when human faith falters. For Ahaz, the prophecy represented a missed opportunity to trust in divine deliverance. For Judah, it became a beacon of hope during dark times. For the world, it revealed God's ultimate plan to dwell with his people in a transformative and intimate way. Isaiah's bold proclamation of Emmanuel continues to resonate, reminding us that God's promises are not bound by human limitations. Whether in the crisis of Ahaz's time or in the broader scope of salvation history, the message is clear: God is with us. And in that truth lies the assurance of deliverance, hope, and eternal faithfulness. The episode involving Ahaz and the prophecy of Emmanuel serves as a vivid tableau illustrating the age-old conflict between faith and politics, divine trust, and human calculation. In a moment of crisis, with Jerusalem under the shadow of invasion, Ahaz chose what seemed tangible and practical, an alliance with Assyria, over the ethereal promise of divine protection. His decision epitomized a dilemma faced by leaders and nations throughout history: how to reconcile the demands of governance with the imperatives of faith and ethics. This choice not only shaped Judah's political trajectory, but also left a spiritual legacy that continues to resonate. Ahaz's refusal of Isaiah's offer to seek a sign from God may appear at first glance as an act of humility, but beneath his words, "I will not ask, I will not put the Lord to the test," lay a heart mired in pride and disbelief. Ahaz's unwillingness to embrace divine guidance highlights the tension between the appearance of piety and the reality of mistrust. By choosing to rely on Assyria, Ahaz secured immediate relief, but at the cost of Judah's autonomy and spiritual integrity. His decision stands as a cautionary tale of the dangers inherent in divorcing political decisions from divine wisdom. Yet even as Ahaz faltered, the prophecy of Emmanuel reaffirmed God's faithfulness to the house of David. This oracle underscored the enduring covenantal promise that a descendant of David would one day fulfill the ideal of a righteous and godly king. Isaiah's declaration, "The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel," not only addressed the immediate context, but also pointed to a future where divine intervention would transcend human failures. The Emmanuel prophecy serves as a theological bridge between the Old and New Testaments, illustrating the continuity of God's redemptive plan. While Isaiah's words offered Ahaz and his contemporaries a reassurance of God's presence during a national crisis, the prophecy's deeper significance unfolded over centuries. For early Christians, the fulfillment of this promise was found in the birth of Jesus, seen as the ultimate embodiment of God with us. The virgin birth, a miraculous event heralding divine intervention, became a cornerstone of Christological belief. This dual-layered prophecy exemplifies how sacred texts gain new dimensions of meaning over time. For Judah, Emmanuel symbolized God's protection against immediate threats. For the Christian faith, it foreshadowed the incarnation of God in human form, a profound act of divine solidarity with humanity. Beyond its theological implications, the prophecy of Emmanuel resonates with universal themes of hope and redemption. In the midst of fear and uncertainty, the promise of God with us assured the people of Judah and successive generations that the divine is neither distant nor indifferent. It is a declaration of God's intimate involvement in human affairs, offering comfort in times of crisis and light in moments of darkness. This message transcends its historical context. Just as Ahaz faced a moment of decision, a choice between fear and faith, so do individuals and nations in every era. The promise of Emmanuel reminds us that even when human trust falters, divine faithfulness remains steadfast. As the political and spiritual turmoil of Ahaz's time unfolded, Isaiah's prophetic vision reached far beyond the immediate crisis. In a moment of divine revelation, the prophet glimpsed a future that transcended the struggles of his present. This vision was no mere dream. It was a heavenly promise of a transformed world, a kingdom where justice, peace, and divine wisdom would prevail. The imagery began with a powerful declaration. The mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as the highest of the mountains. It will be exalted above the hills, and all nations will stream to it. This metaphor symbolized the centrality of God's rule in a renewed world. Nations, once divided by war and ambition, would now unite in a collective pilgrimage to the house of the Lord. The people, humbled and seeking wisdom, would declare, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways so that we may walk in his paths." This radical shift in priorities, where the pursuit of divine knowledge replaced military and political ambitions, heralded a new era of harmony. At the heart of Isaiah's vision stood the promise of a messianic ruler, described as a shoot emerging from the stump of Jesse. This imagery of new life sprouting from apparent desolation symbolized the enduring vitality of the Davidic line. The Messiah would embody the virtues of wisdom, understanding, counsel, power, knowledge, and reverence for God. He will not judge by what he sees with his eyes, or decide by what he hears with his ears. But with righteousness, he will judge the needy. With justice, he will give decisions for the poor of the earth. This ideal ruler contrasted sharply with the flawed monarchs of Isaiah's time, offering hope for a government rooted in fairness, compassion, and divine guidance. Under this Messiah, peace would not merely be the absence of conflict, but a profound transformation of the natural and social order. One of the most striking aspects of Isaiah's vision was the imagery of a restored creation. "The wolf will live with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat, the calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them." This idyllic scene symbolized a complete reversal of the fallen world's enmity and strife. Predators and prey coexisted in harmony, led by the innocence and vulnerability of a child. The natural order, once marred by violence and fear, was now transformed into a reflection of divine peace. Isaiah's vision culminated with a declaration of universal safety. "They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea." This sweeping promise extended beyond Israel to encompass the entire cosmos, affirming that God's redemptive plan would ultimately restore all of creation. The themes of Emmanuel and Isaiah's vision of peace continue to resonate across time. In the face of political instability, social injustice, and personal despair, these prophecies offer a beacon of hope. They remind us that God's purposes are not thwarted by human failings, and that His promise of redemption extends to every corner of creation. Isaiah's words, born out of the crises of ancient Judah, speak to a universal longing for justice, restoration, and divine presence. They challenge us to trust in God's sovereignty, to seek wisdom beyond human calculation, and to embrace the transformative hope of God with us. Whether in moments of individual doubt or collective uncertainty, Isaiah's prophetic vision remains a source of inspiration, inviting all to look beyond present trials to the ultimate fulfillment of God's promises. The promise of universal security, as envisioned by Isaiah, transcended the mere cessation of war. It envisioned a world transformed at its core, where human nature, relationships, and creation itself would reflect divine peace and harmony. This was not just a dream of external tranquility, but an all-encompassing vision of renewal, a future where the root causes of violence, injustice, and division would be eradicated and replaced by an intimate, universal knowledge of the Lord. At the heart of this vision was the figure of the Messiah, described as the root of Jesse. This descendant of David's line would stand as a beacon for all peoples, a rallying point for humanity's fractured nations. Isaiah proclaimed, "The nations will seek him, and his resting place will be glorious." This image of international unity under the Messiah's leadership sharply contrasted with the geopolitical chaos of Isaiah's era. Where alliances were fragile, wars constant, and enmity endemic, Isaiah envisioned a future where nations would converge not for conflict, but for worship and peace. The Messiah's reign would transcend cultural and political divides, offering a unifying hope for a fragmented world. Isaiah's vision extended beyond human relationships to the very nature of work and economy. He foresaw a time when the tools of war would be repurposed for life-giving activities. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. This vivid metaphor symbolized the redirection of human ingenuity and resources from destruction to cultivation. A society once consumed by conflict would now prioritize productivity, sustainability, and shared prosperity. It was an image of a flourishing community where the energy once spent on division would be channeled into nurturing life. A hallmark of Isaiah's prophecy was its promise of social justice, a theme deeply embedded in his ministry. The Messiah, endowed with divine wisdom and discernment, would govern with righteousness. He will judge the poor with justice and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. For a people burdened by corrupt rulers and systemic inequities, this was a radical promise. Isaiah envisioned a kingdom where the marginalized and oppressed would receive fairness and compassion, where justice would not be an abstract ideal, but a tangible reality. The Messiah's leadership would reflect the very heart of God, one that champions the vulnerable and restores dignity to the downtrodden. Isaiah's vision also spoke of a transformation in human communication and understanding. He prophesied that the Lord would remove the veil that separated nations, eliminating the barriers of language, culture, and prejudice. This promise of universal understanding pointed to an era where humanity's diversity would no longer breed division but inspire mutual respect and collaboration. Isaiah saw a future where the richness of cultures would contribute to a shared celebration of God's wisdom and creativity. The peace Isaiah described was not limited to external circumstances. It promised a state of personal and communal flourishing. He painted a picture of universal security and contentment. Everyone will sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one will make them afraid. This bucolic image represented the fulfillment of basic needs, the fruit of one's labor enjoyed without fear of loss or oppression. In a world often marked by scarcity and exploitation, Isaiah envisioned an era of abundance where each person would live in peace and satisfaction. Isaiah's prophecy also extended to the physical and spiritual barriers that separated humanity from God and one another. He described a world where every valley shall be raised up, every mountain and hill made low. The rough ground shall become level, the rugged places a plain. This poetic language symbolized the removal of obstacles, whether physical, social, or spiritual, that hindered access to God. It was a promise of inclusivity, where all could approach the divine presence without impediment, signifying a world made ready for universal communion with the Creator. Isaiah's vision even touched on the very fabric of human life. He foresaw a time when life expectancy would dramatically increase. The one who dies at 100 will be thought a mere child. This promise echoed the ancient narratives of the patriarchs and suggested a return to the Creator's original intent for humanity, a life of fullness and vitality. Coupled with this extended longevity was the eradication of unnecessary suffering. The sound of weeping and crying will no longer be heard. In this restored kingdom, joy would replace sorrow, and pain would be a relic of the past, offering a radically improved quality of life. The transformation Isaiah envisioned was not limited to humanity. He saw a time when creation itself would be restored. The desert and the parched land will be glad, the wilderness will rejoice and blossom. This flourishing of barren places symbolized the healing of the natural world, a restoration of harmony between humanity and creation. It reflected the interconnectedness of all life, showing that the well-being of the earth and its inhabitants were intrinsically linked. In this renewed order, the earth itself would celebrate the reign of righteousness. Isaiah's vision culminated in a scene of global worship. He saw all nations ascending to Jerusalem to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles, a harvest festival of gratitude. This image of unity in reverence represented the fulfillment of God's purpose for humanity, a global community united in worship and thanksgiving. In this vision, religious and cultural divisions dissolved, replaced by a shared acknowledgement of the Creator's sovereignty. It was a symphony of praise, a foretaste of the ultimate reconciliation of all creation with its Maker. Isaiah's grand vision of the kingdom of peace offered more than a distant promise. It became a living hope for generations. In tumultuous times, it provided a perspective that transcended immediate struggles, pointing to a future where justice, peace, and divine presence would reign supreme. Though the fulfillment of this vision seemed distant, it profoundly shaped the faith and aspirations of subsequent generations. It inspired people to work, pray, and hope for the coming of this glorious kingdom, a world transformed not only by the absence of conflict, but by the presence of God, filling the earth as the waters cover the sea. Isaiah's prophecy remains a testament to the power of divine promises, reminding humanity of the Creator's ultimate plan for renewal, restoration, and flourishing. In its timeless scope, the vision still calls us to imagine and strive for a future where God's justice and peace prevail, a beacon that continues to light the path through history's darkest moments. The promise of a transformed future, woven throughout Isaiah's prophecies, resonated with a depth that transcended the immediate struggles of the people of Judah. It offered more than solace to a nation in exile. it painted a grand vision of spiritual, social, and cosmic renewal. In a time of desolation, where the scars of exile and judgment weighed heavily, Isaiah's words were like balm to the wounded hearts of the chosen people. This was not merely a promise of physical return to their ancestral land, but an all-encompassing restoration that envisioned the rebirth of humanity, creation, and the divine relationship. The proclamation of restoration began with a declaration of divine comfort. "Comfort, comfort my people, says your God." This heavenly call announced the end of punishment and the dawn of a new era of grace. The imagery of valleys raised, mountains leveled, and crooked paths made straight spoke to more than physical geography. It symbolized the removal of every obstacle separating the people from their God. This promise underscored God's willingness to intervene powerfully in history, redeeming his people and restoring their relationship with him. Isaiah's language was deeply evocative, portraying God as the ultimate restorer who would rebuild ruins and mend broken bonds. This vision extended beyond the tangible. It encompassed spiritual renewal, collective healing, and the re-establishment of a covenantal relationship between the Creator and his people. Central to Isaiah's vision was the transformation of Jerusalem into a city of unparalleled splendor. "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you." No longer a symbol of rebellion and judgment, the holy city would become a beacon of light for all nations. This renewal was not merely structural, but spiritual. The divine presence would dwell in Jerusalem, drawing people from every corner of the earth to worship the God of Israel. Isaiah envisioned a city radiating with God's glory, a center of universal worship and unity. This renewed Jerusalem represented the heart of a global transformation, where the divisions among nations would dissolve and humanity would gather in shared reverence for the Creator. Isaiah's vision transcended human restoration, extending to the entire cosmos. "See, I will create new heavens and a new earth. The former things will not be remembered, nor will they come to mind." This promise spoke of a radical renewal that encompassed all of creation. It was not merely political or social reconstruction, but a reweaving of the fabric of reality. In this new order, peace, justice, and divine harmony would be the norm. This cosmic restoration offered hope not only for exiled Israel, but for all creation, groaning under the weight of corruption and sin. Isaiah's promise of restoration emphasized the inclusion of those historically marginalized and excluded. "Then will the eyes of the blind be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then will the lame leap like a deer, and the mute tongue shout for joy." This was more than metaphorical language. It represented a holistic restoration that encompassed physical, social, and spiritual dimensions. The new divine order promised full participation and dignity for all, ensuring that no one would be left behind. Those once deemed unclean or undesirable would now be honored and fully integrated into the community of God's people. The restoration envisioned by Isaiah extended beyond Judah's borders, embracing all nations. "My house will be called a house of prayer for all nations." This revolutionary statement challenged narrow notions of election and exclusivity, revealing a God whose covenantal love sought to embrace all humanity. Gentiles, once seen as outsiders, would not only be welcomed, but play active roles in worship and service. Isaiah's vision expanded the understanding of the covenant, portraying a future where humanity, in all its diversity, would be united in the worship of the Creator. Isaiah's prophecy addressed not only physical and social restoration, but also the deep emotional and psychological wounds inflicted by exile and oppression. "The Lord will bind up the wounds of his people and heal the injuries he has inflicted." This therapeutic imagery reflected a profound understanding of the collective trauma experienced by the nation. It promised a healing that went beyond the surface, reaching into the depths of the people's broken hearts and fractured identity. Isaiah's vision reassured them that their scars would not define their future, but would be transformed into testimonies of God's grace and restorative power. Nanis. At the core of Isaiah's promise was the renewal of the covenant between God and his people. The prophet envisioned a time when the law would no longer be external, written on stone tablets, but internalized within the hearts of the people. "I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts." This transformation marked a profound shift in the relationship between God and humanity. No longer reliant on elaborate rituals or external structures, obedience would flow naturally from hearts aligned with divine purposes. This new covenant promised an unprecedented intimacy with the Creator, offering hope for a relationship built on love, trust, and mutual understanding. Isaiah's vision included a promise of economic prosperity and ecological flourishing. "The desert and the parched land will be glad. The wilderness will rejoice and blossom. Your barns will overflow, and your vats will brim over with new wine." These promises of fertility and abundance symbolized divine blessing in every aspect of life. They contrasted starkly with the scarcity and struggle experienced in exile, painting a picture of a world where humanity and creation thrived in harmony. This ecological renewal reflected the restoration of the balance disrupted by sin, pointing to a future where even the earth itself would rejoice. Central to this vision of restoration was the figure of an anointed leader, the servant of the Lord. "A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out." This servant embodied a leadership marked by compassion and gentleness, yet was also described as a powerful deliverer who would establish justice and be a light to the nations. This messianic figure became the focal point of hope for both national and spiritual restoration, offering a vision of leadership rooted in both strength and humility. Isaiah's promise of restoration provided more than a vision for the exiled. It became a source of enduring hope for humanity. It reminded the people that their suffering was not the end of the story, that God's faithfulness would prevail even in the darkest moments. The prophet's words pointed to a future where justice, peace, and divine presence would reign, not just for Judah, but for all creation. This vision of restoration, encapsulating physical renewal, social justice, spiritual intimacy, and cosmic redemption, remains a beacon of hope across the ages. It calls humanity to anticipate and work toward a world transformed by the love and power of God. A world where, at last, the light of the Lord fills the earth as the waters cover the sea. In times of uncertainty and oppression, Isaiah's promise of restoration redefined worship and religious practice, emphasizing the transformative power of justice and compassion. No longer would fasting or ritual observance suffice as hollow acts of piety. Isaiah declared, "Is not this the fast that I have chosen, to loose the chains of injustice, to untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free, and to break every yoke?" This radical reimagining of worship connected religious practice with ethical living, asserting that true devotion to God must manifest in tangible acts of love and mercy. Isaiah's vision called for the seamless integration of ritual and ethics, ensuring that worship would be a force for societal healing and restoration. Isaiah's vision of restoration extended beyond Judah, envisioning an international order centered on Jerusalem. In this future, nations and kings would stream to the holy city, bringing their wealth and offering homage to the God of Israel. "Nations will come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn." This imagery of a universal pilgrimage highlighted Jerusalem's transformation into a beacon of divine revelation and worship. Its influence would not rest on military might or economic power, but on its role as the spiritual center of a renewed world. The prophet's vision suggested a radical reordering of global relations, where reverence for God replaced the strife and competition of Isaiah's time. The restoration Isaiah foretold went beyond the cessation of conflict to envision a profound transformation in human relationships. Using poetic imagery, the prophet proclaimed, "The wolf and the lamb will feed together, and the lion will eat straw like the ox." This vivid picture of natural enemies living in harmony symbolized the overcoming of ancient enmities among peoples. It pointed to a future of deep unity and genuine community, where divisions would give way to mutual understanding and peace. Isaiah's vision was not a utopian dream, but a divine promise that human nature itself would be transformed, enabling true reconciliation and shared purpose. At the heart of Isaiah's prophecy was the promise of a tangible and continuous divine presence. The glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all people will see it together. This vision transcended the limitations of prior religious experiences. It spoke of a time when the barrier between heaven and earth would dissolve, allowing all humanity to encounter God directly. Isaiah's promise of God's manifest presence offered a profound hope, a future where divine glory would saturate human life, bringing light and salvation to all. Isaiah's message invited the people to look beyond their immediate suffering toward a glorious future shaped by God's redemptive power. It was a call to active faith, inspiring perseverance and trust, even in the darkest times. The vision of total renewal, spiritual, social, ecological, and cosmic, served as a beacon of hope that sustained the exiled people and continues to resonate with readers today. Isaiah's prophecy was not merely a prediction of future events, but a call to live out the principles of restoration in the present. It challenged every generation to participate in God's ongoing work of redemption, ensuring that the promise of renewal remained alive and active. As we reflect on Isaiah's life and prophecies, his message challenges us not to remain passive observers of history, but to become active agents of transformation in our own time. Just as Isaiah confronted the injustices and divisions of his day, we too are called to respond to the brokenness of the world around us. What can we learn from Isaiah's vision? Consider how often we feel overwhelmed by the injustices and conflicts in the world. Like Isaiah's contemporaries, we long for a radical change, a society that reflects the peace, justice, and unity of his prophetic vision. But Isaiah reminds us that change begins not on a grand stage, but in the heart and within our immediate circles. Isaiah's vision of restoration offers us practical ways to embody his teachings in our daily lives. 1. Act with compassion. True worship, as Isaiah proclaimed, involves acts of justice and mercy. Whether it's standing up for someone treated unfairly at work or helping a neighbor in need, every small act contributes to the larger vision of restoration. 2. Seek reconciliation. The vision of wolves and lambs living in harmony challenges us to mend broken relationships and pursue peace in our own lives. Reaching out to reconcile with estranged family members or engaging in respectful dialogue with those who hold opposing views are ways to live out Isaiah's promise of unity. 3. Care for creation. Isaiah's prophecy of ecological renewal calls us to take responsibility for the health of our environment. Small steps like reducing waste, supporting sustainable practices, or planting a garden can reflect the harmony between humanity and creation envisioned by the prophet. 4. Work for justice. Isaiah's call to loose the chains of injustice urges us to confront the inequities in our society. Whether through advocacy, volunteering, or supporting causes that uplift the marginalized, we can be part of the divine work of redemption. Isaiah's life and message inspire us to be voices of hope and agents of change in our own time. The challenge is set. Will we rise to it? Will we, like Isaiah, speak truth to power, defend the vulnerable, and work for a world that reflects God's justice and peace? The choice is ours. We can read Isaiah's words as ancient history, or we can allow them to transform us into participants in the unfolding story of restoration. Every small step we take, reconciling relationships, advocating for justice, caring for creation, brings us closer to the glorious vision Isaiah proclaimed millennia ago. Isaiah's prophecies are more than relics of the past. They are an invitation to action in the present. They remind us that the promise of restoration is not merely a distant hope, but a living reality we can begin to build today. As we continue to explore the scriptures and uncover their treasures, may Isaiah's words echo in our hearts and inspire us to be vessels of hope, justice, and renewal in our world. This journey through Isaiah's life and message is not the end, but a beginning. Let his vision challenge and transform you as you step into the calling to be a light in the darkness and a voice for change. May the words of Isaiah continue to resonate, guiding you toward the peace and restoration he envisioned.